So thank you everyone for coming, and as more people come, that they are also very welcome, but we should get going. We'd like to invite you, to welcome you tonight to the third of our events in the series, Common Ground and the Common Good. And we had an event on Saturday, June the 12th, and an event 2 weeks ago on July 7th. And we have 2 more summer events coming up after this on Wednesday, August 4th and Wednesday, August 18th. And then a final wrap-up event on Saturday, September the 11th in the morning. So we hope that you will register for these additional events, because we are learning a lot about church redevelopment and what it might look like for us in the Diocese of Toronto. So just to go over what tonight's going to look like, we're going to have an opening prayer and land acknowledgement from me, opening prayer from my colleague Janet Marshall, and land acknowledgement from me. And then I will introduce our first speaker, Abigail Mariah. And then immediately after Abigail's presentation, we will have the Reverend Dr. Carmen Lansdowne and her presentation. And then we will do a Q&A, at which point you can direct questions to either or both of our panelists. For the Q&A, if you look down on the bottom of your screen, you will see a little chat button. And if questions come up for you, or things that you want further clarification on, just pop them in the chat, and myself and my colleague Janet will be reviewing the chat so that we make sure that we catch all your questions, and we will bring those forward first in the Q&A, and then after that open it up. A reminder to everyone to continue to keep yourself on mute. That's the little one at the bottom left-hand corner, so that you don't interrupt the presenters. Also, sometimes when you join a Zoom meeting, it comes up as iPad or somebody's computer or something. And we'd like to know that we're speaking to a real person, especially if you have a question. We'd like to identify you by your real name. So you can go to manage, you can go to participants, and or even up in the right-hand corner of your square that you're in, and you can rename yourself. You can either go to your own name by clicking on participants, or you can go in the right-hand corner of the little square that has your picture and to click on the 3 dots, and it'll say rename as one of the options, and you can put your real name in. So without further ado, I'd like to invite my colleague Janet Marshall to open us in prayer.
Thank you, Elin. Let's take a deep breath and prepare ourselves for prayer. O God, who created and loves all people, we thank you for gathering us here tonight to listen and learn and to be inspired. We come before you this evening acknowledging the sinfulness of racial inequity in our country, in our church, and in ourselves. Forgive us for our part in it. Help us to see the reality of racism wherever it exists and to have the courage to challenge it. Through your Holy Spirit, may we be given the grace and power to change within ourselves and also to join with others to act, doing the work of love and justice in the world. Through the name of your Son, Jesus, who came for all people. Amen.
The Diocese of Toronto is located on the traditional territories of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Ottawa, and the Anishinaabe nations. This land was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the land around the Great Lakes. We acknowledge in particular the Mississaugas of the Credit, signatories of the Toronto Treaties, as well as the Chippewas of Georgina, the Chippewas of Rama, the Mississaugas of Scugog, Alderville, Hiawatha, and Curve Lake First Nations. We acknowledge all those who've been displaced by generations of international colonialism and the theft of people, communities, families, children, and resources from the continent of Africa and around the globe. We acknowledge with gratitude the brilliant contributions and courageous leadership of generations of Black and Indigenous peoples who have shaped our communities, founded movements, and built spaces of cultural resilience. We commit ourselves to confronting, challenging, and uprooting racism and colonialism at all levels of our personal, social, and corporate life, so that we might all uphold the spirit of the dish with one spoon covenant for our mutual flourishing. And I'm just going to introduce Carmen really quickly. So the Reverend Dr. Carmen Lansdowne is the compassionate, thoughtful, and creative Executive Director of First United Church Community Ministries Society and First United Church Social Housing Society in Vancouver. Carmen joined First United in February 2017 and has led an organizational turnaround resulting in increased stability and capacity. And First United is currently in the process, and we're going to hear about it, of building with Illuma Native Housing Society a new redevelopment of their property that will include not only housing, but also all kinds of community space as well as worship space. Carmen currently sits on the boards of the Vancouver Foundation and also the Sandy Soto Spiritual Center in Beausejour, Manitoba. She chairs the National Indigenous Candidacy Board for the United Church of Canada, supporting both Indigenous and non-Indigenous candidates for ministry in Indigenous contexts. She has served in the past on the Pension Board of the United Church of Canada, on the executive of United Church's General Council, and as United Church representative to the executive and central committees of the World Council of Churches, as well as on the Theology Interchurch Interfaith Committee of the United Church of Canada. Carmen has a PhD from the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California, and is a member of the Heiltsuk First Nation. Welcome, Carmen.
Thanks, Glenn. Let me just see if I can find the right screen here. Does that show up as full screen for you?
It does. Okay,
perfect. I also just have to make sure that I can somehow see the other background document that I wanted. So hold on one sec. Did that, oh, it did close the window. Hold on one second here. It's the downside of multiple screens on Zoom. Let's see here, try again. Okay, let's try this one. Does that work? There we go. Okay, does that work? You can see the full screen or no?
We can see it as a slide, and then we can see your other slides on the side and your toolbar at the top.
Okay, hold on. I'm just not going to have the other document open that I wanted to have open, or I'll switch off my PowerPoint presentation if I get to where I wanted to share that. Okay, now you see the full screen again.
We do.
Okay, perfect. So thank you so much for having me. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about our project in specific, and in particular, the ways that we did community engagement, the way that we're currently going through design development at the moment and the regulatory processes, and then just touch a little bit on the ways that we see our project as reconciliation in action and faith in action. So just a little bit of history. First United Church has been at the corner of, well, it's been in Vancouver for 136 years, which is, if you know about your United Church ecumenical sibling, that predates the United Church of Canada, but we were founded by the Presbyterian, Methodist, Congregationalist, and a couple of other little denominations in 1925. And so First Presbyterian was the first non-Roman Catholic, non-Anglican church to be founded in the city of Vancouver, predates the city of Vancouver by about 2 months. And the first Presbyterian church was built on East Cordova Street. It burnt down in the Great Fire of Vancouver, was rebuilt 2 months later. 6 years later, they outgrew that space and purchased the property that is now on the corner of Gore Avenue and Hastings Street East, which is where our building currently stands. This is the second building that has been on this property, and we've been at this corner since 1893. One of the other fun things that I've learned about First United is originally the Hastings Mill area of the settlement of Vancouver was originally where all the resource extraction wealth was happening in the early settlement of Vancouver. And as the wealth started to move out of the neighborhood into Mount Pleasant and Shaughnessy, which would be like, I guess, like the Rosedale areas of, to put it in Toronto context, the community here started to change, and it started to be racialized communities and the working poor. And so all three founding denominations of the United Church had social workers on staff prior to the Great Depression to try and respond to the increased needs of the community around us. And we have a really long legacy of responding in innovative ways to community needs. I could talk for hours about that, but I won't tonight. But over 135 years, we've responded to those direct needs of our community, and our space no longer adequately meets those needs because our building was built in 1965 to be a place of congregational worship primarily. And now we are a church that does not primarily focus on worship. In fact, we don't have Sunday services at First United. We have currently in our church a drop-in, a community volunteer income tax program, legal advocacy, a community meal program that serves over 120,000 meals a year, and a 60-bed homeless shelter. And so our demands, it was just not built for this type of work. And we've loved this building a lot over the last 60 years, but it no longer meets our needs, especially when we consider, functional programming and safety. So why we looked at redevelopment is because we believe that the community we serve deserves the dignity and care that a purpose-built space can provide. And the downtown east side of Vancouver is the poorest urban postal code in Canada. So we have a significant number of households that earn less than $14,000 a year. And a lot of racialization of poverty in the downtown east side, and a lot of like 1 to 4 story walk-up buildings that are sort of like ripe for redevelopment. And so we wanted to be part of revitalization of the corner of Hastings and Gore as a sort of opposing force to gentrification. And so to really have it be a community-led rejuvenation of the community rather than the displacement, participating in potential displacement of the poor in this community. So what we did is we started with a really in-depth community engagement process. And we worked with a woman named Lanny Brunn, who is a social planner that got into the practice of social planning through her work with the homeless. She was previously a manager with a partner organization here in the downtown east side, and then went back to grad school to study social planning. We engaged her to do a sensitive listening project with the community. I believe very much in like human-centered design and grounding our practice in empathy. And so how do we know what to build unless we know, why we're building it and for whom? And so in the spring of 2017, Lanny interviewed with one of her colleagues and 2 volunteers from our staff, 96 individuals who are experiencing homelessness on the street. And then she also did another focus group with a neighboring organization where 26 people showed up for a focus group conversation. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the actual script that she used in those conversations, because it was really important to me that we had a deep understanding of not only like what the primary needs were of the community that we are serving, but that those needs be stated in their own words and not based on our assumptions of, even though we've been working in this community and have really close relationships with people, that we needed to provide an opportunity as the very first starting point for the community to speak for themselves. So she would approach somebody and said, "Hi, do you live in the neighborhood?" "Yes, well, my name is, I'll say Carmen, and I'm a listener with First United Church. We're listening to people in the community to find out what you think is needed, services you wish were here, what's important to you, and if there's anything that First United Church could do different. Do you have time to talk for a couple of minutes?" And then just assured them that they would keep the input anonymous and that they could end the conversation at any time, that she wanted to record it, either on paper or an audio recording, whichever the community member preferred. and that assured them that she would be passing on whatever feedback they gave to staff and board of directors to make better decisions about future programs. And so she really made it about future programs and not about a promise of like redevelopment of the building or anything, because this was before we even decided, yes, for sure, we wanted to redevelop. So the things that she, not only did she outline the questions in advance, but then for her and for her colleagues, she also outlined what are the things with each of the series of questions do we want to pay attention to? So with those intro questions, we wanted to pay attention to, is the downtown east side neighborhood where they consider home or spend time, and to learn about what services they use and where they frequent. So then the next section was entitled Your Story. So the questions were, tell me about a time when you felt cared for in the downtown east side. Tell me about a time when you didn't feel cared for in the downtown east side. Can you tell me about a time when you felt most like yourself, like your best self and who you want to be? If you could solve one problem for yourself, what would you fix? And if you could solve one problem on the downtown east side, what would you do? And so the purpose of those questions was to really pay attention to what helped the community feel cared for, happy and healthy as their best selves. We then asked how they identified themselves. So how do you describe yourself? How do you tell people about who you are? And what part of your heritage or identity or orientation or abilities are you proud of? So those were sort of like open-ended questions to try and, allow people the agency to share about their race or ethnicity, their first language, cultural identity, gender identity and expression, sexual orientation, if they had immigrant or refugee backgrounds, and then if they had any disabilities, without being invasive. We're what we consider a minimal barrier facility. So we really try not to, force any kind of like reporting on the community that we serve, and are really trying to build trust in all of our approaches to our work. Then we ask questions about First United. So have you used services at First United before? What do you like best about First United? What is the worst? What do people say about it? Why do people go there? What services do you use and how often? What do you wish they did? How is the food at First United, and what do you wish they served? So we were paying attention to if needs were being met at First United, our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So it was like a very casual SWOT assessment. And then we delved into possible programs. So what programs would be helpful for you? And we were paying attention to if there were like seniors programming needs, health conditions that we could address, mental health conditions we could address, the arts, so live music, open mic, visual arts, amenities that they needed, more private spaces, and tables for two came up a lot, social space and how they wanted that to look, training and access, advocacy, and drug use needs. And then we asked spiritual questions. So do you identify with a type of spirituality? Do you wish you could access more spiritual care? What has brought about the most healing for you? Have you experienced a time of sorrow when you wished for more support? Have you experienced time of joy that you also wished you could share with others? And so here we were paying attention to grief, the need for peer counselors, foster care, hope and hopelessness, dignity, faith. So either spiritual but not religious, Christian, or other religiously identified care, family issues, and the legacies of residential schools and 60 Scoop. And then we talked about housing needs. So what type of housing do you have? What's the best part of your housing? What's the worst part of your housing? With a magic wand, what would you change about your housing? And so paying attention to housing need, but also what type of housing people wanted. And then food security. In the last 12 months, did food run out before you had money to buy more? If yes, how did you get by? Food banks, food lineups. Do you have any health conditions or religious requirements that would affect your diet, like diabetes or trying to keep kosher, or being celiac? So we wanted to pay attention to the level of food security or insecurity, health issues that could be helped with good food, and where they're getting their food from. And then we have had since the 1970s a legal advocacy clinic. So we asked, have you ever met with an advocate before? Have you ever needed to meet with an advocate? And what types of needs that they wanted? have met. And then we also did a series of questions specifically for community members who are on Suboxone, which is sort of like a withdrawal, a medical withdrawal program from using opioids. And so for people who are methadone or Suboxone, what are your needs? Are you hoping to go back to work? Do you have other medical or mental health conditions? And are you connected to resources or services in the community? And then we also had questions for partner organizations that we did through a survey. So we asked our partner organizations to tell us about what they and their organization did. Do they partner with First United? What do we do well at First United? What don't we do well? Are there needs that the community has that are not being met by anyone's current services? And do you think the food and shelter program are the best use of First United's resources? And getting our partner organizations to answer those questions. And so before we ever made any kind of decision about, yes, we're going to redevelop this property, or no, we're not going to redevelop this property, we really wanted to say, like, what are the needs of the community? How are those best addressed by First United? And what are the things that we can do well to ensure that the community's needs are being met? And out of that community engagement process, we found that there were 7 needs in particular that were identified, and in order of importance by the community. Number 1, to the surprise of no one, was housing and adequate affordable housing. Food services was 2nd. Our emergency shelter was 3rd. Responding to the overdose crisis and the needs of people who use drugs was 4th. Spiritual care was 5th, which I know we asked specific questions about spiritual care, but in British Columbia, especially, we're known as like the no zone, where 90% of people identify as being of no faith background. And so the fact that the community wanted us to be responding to their spiritual care needs was really huge for us and affirming for us. Our like day programming, so all the kinds of like social connection things that we do at First United came up, and then legal advocacy was the final piece that was decided by the community. So from that, we went through a series of facilitated conversations, again with city spaces, and then with a nonprofit development manager who helped us to sort of outline the order of magnitude of what we could do. We're in the process of changing architects. So our solution was developed by a design architect, but now we're working with a different architect. But our solution was to build this multi-purpose, multi-story purpose-built facility that incorporates both the church space on the bottom 4 floors and then over 100 units of non-market housing. The board made a decision, although we have an existing social housing society, that society has also been in decline almost since its inception. And so we didn't feel like we had the capacity to operate housing on our own. And we had a couple of things that we decided we wanted to do. One was to maintain ownership and not to sell any airspace parcels if possible, and to maintain the asset of the church. The second was to be able to provide as much charitable housing as possible, to really stay away from market rents if that was at all possible. Of course, with the cost of construction, that gets really tricky. And we were going through this at a time when there was really significant investment in urban Indigenous housing, but at both at all 3 levels of government: municipal, provincial, and federal. And so even though there are several of us that identify as Indigenous on our leadership team, we are not an Indigenous organization. And we felt like if we were going to be offering Indigenous housing that could be reconciliation in action and could also help us to maximize the affordability of housing, which is also very much needed by this community. And I will say that 40% of the community members in our neighborhood self-identify as Indigenous. So there's a huge need for affordable housing for Indigenous people in our neighborhood, that we needed to partner with an organization that was Indigenous, an Indigenous organization that was also Indigenous led. LUMA has a fantastic reputation of being very tenant-centered, and there was a lot of overlap between their organizational values and ours. And so we're partnering with them to operate the 103 units of non-market Indigenous housing. And then, I'll talk a little bit about like what we're going to do inside of the building. So the current programs that we operate include legal advocacy, our meal program, sacred space. So we have a chapel, and we have been running programs for the past several years called Spirit Focus and Spirit Circle. So they're really not necessarily explicitly Christian. There may be some days where we recognize a Christian season, liturgical season, or like read a scripture passage, but we would just as likely like open Spirit Circle with like a Cat Stevens song, or a reading from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, or a Rumi poem. And so we really try to make it inclusive for everybody. We have a community help desk where over 2,000 community members come per month, and we hand out clean underwear and socks, like period supplies for people who have menstruation. We have a health and hygiene program, so we offer public showers, and so we'll hand out toiletries and towels, razors, shaving cream, toothbrushes and toothpaste, dental floss, pet food. So for people who run out of money at the end of the month and can't afford to buy dog food or cat food, we have emergency pet food supplies. Incontinence supplies for seniors who can't afford to buy Depends or other incontinence products. We have a community drop-in. We have over 300 people who use our address as their permanent mailing address, so they can receive their mail at the church and then come in and pick it up. And then they also can drop off their mail or parcels that they need mailed, and we'll send it out for them free of cost. Foot care is probably a bit of a misnomer. It's more like a foot soak and social connection time. So we provide places for people to come in and soak their feet in Epsom salts and warm water, and then they get paper towel and they can dry their feet, and we provide moisturizer and clean socks. People developing trench foot or gangrene, especially in the winter in Vancouver when their feet are wet and dirty all the time. It just provides a little bit of relief in addition to having access to a shower. But more importantly, it provides opportunities for our staff and volunteers to sort of reach out and say, hey, your feet are looking pretty sore. Like, do you want us to call a podiatrist around the corner and see if you can get in to see a nurse or a doctor? Or, and also just to check in with people and have conversations with them and see how they're doing. We do over between 2,000 and 3,000 individual taxes every year. And then we also are a place of training for post-secondary students. So we have LPN and RN nursing students who come, social work students, theological students. And then the new programs that we were able to incorporate into this space was a resource room with a public library, like a little mini library, and computer lab, a dedicated space for day sleeping, more private spaces for one-on-one conversations, and then an outdoor area that's just for the community on the second floor deck. You can see a picture of that here in this slide. So the sort of floating office that's there with the musqueam blanket design on it, or the weaving pattern that's on it, will be our legal advocacy offices. And then underneath, there's like a little bit of a dedicated outdoor smoking area that's covered. So they have sun protection in the summer and rain protection in the winter, but also a space that can be used for like sacred circles or things, programming needs that we might want to do outside, and then a staff rooftop garden on the fourth floor deck. We've incorporated Indigenous design into the actual building. So here you can see, this is patterned off of a musqueam weaving by a well-known artist named Deborah Sparrow. And we're commissioning new weavings that will be used for the actual design for this building, but she's allowed us to use this in this part of the building. There will also be traditional Coast Salish welcome figures at the front of the building. We've engaged Host Consulting, which is a public art consultants made up of 3 young women from the 3 host nations in BC, so one Musqueam, one Squamish, one Tsleil-Waututh, and they're going to lead the art procurement process for the building. And then there will also be opportunities for other Indigenous design to be included in the interior design. We've also, in addition to the project architects who are really sort of getting us through to the working drawing phase, we've also engaged Patrick Stewart, who is a professor of architecture. He's a member of the Nisga'a First Nation, and he's doing all of the interior design for the church spaces of the building on the bottom 4 floors, as well as the amenity spaces and the housing floors. The other thing that we did that was reconciliation, 2 more things I want to talk about. One was we had to go through the Vancouver Heritage Commission as part of the regulatory process. And they wanted us to talk about, even though our building wasn't technically a heritage building, because our ministry predates the city of Vancouver, we had to talk about how we're preserving the intangible cultural heritage of First United, and also the ways in which we were going to honor the intangible cultural heritage of the host nations here in Vancouver. And so we wrote quite an impressive, if I can toot our horn a little bit, critique of the regulatory process and the Heritage Commission in our statement of heritage significance. Because the building, most heritage consultants focus on built form, and that's not what we were doing. We came to clarity with the city staff that we needed to be talking about decolonizing the church, decolonizing architecture, and decolonizing the history of Vancouver. And everybody was trying to figure out, like, who are we going to hire to do this? And I said, wait a second, on our consultant team, we have Chief Ian Campbell, who's a hereditary chief in the Squamish. We have Dr. Patrick Stewart, who has a PhD in decolonizing architecture. And we have Dr. Carmen Lansdowne, who has a PhD in decolonizing the church. Can we write the statement of significance? And they said yes. So it's public record if you want to look at it. I basically talked about the way that the whole regulatory process was still colonialist and racist. And then we also made a naming policy for our capital campaign that said we would name no spaces in the building after families, individuals, or corporations. So, you'll never see like the tech center for food security or something like that, that all of the spaces could be dedicated by donors, but the names of the spaces or parts of the building would be Indigenous names that recognized language and important historical people, and specifically the women who helped co-found the city of Vancouver. So the women who married settlers, whose names are almost never mentioned, and important Indigenous concepts around generosity and place names in Vancouver that could be recognized in the space. And so our board made a decision to decolonize our capital campaign strategy and change our naming policy. And so those are some of the ways that we've put reconciliation in action, as well as like really committing to engaging Indigenous consultants wherever possible in this building. And then just a little bit about faith in action. So, this is a passage from the book of the prophet Isaiah that we've used in talking to other First United communities or other United Church communities of faith around joining with us on this journey. We anticipate the total cost of the project, including all of our relocation of programs, all of the consultants, the capital campaign, additional staff we've have to hire in the meantime, is going to be about $68 million, and we have to raise $30 million of that. And so the wider church has been a really important partner in raising the funds that we need to do the building. We have not launched the public phase of the capital campaign. That'll launch when we start the demolition of the existing building. But we've made really great progress. So we've raised over $20 million out of that 30 million goal without going public. So we've got really strong partnerships with the rest of the church and calling them to faith in action in this project. And so I'll just share a little inspirational tidbit here. So this is Angelo and his dog Kale. Angelo has graciously shared with us the story of his interactions with First United, and has really gifted us with the use of his image and his story as the face of the capital campaign. And so when we asked him to share his story with us, he said, when we found First United, it was an absolute blessing. Without their help, I don't know if we'd still be here. And because we started with the community engagement and how important it was to hear from the community, I just wanted to end really briefly with that little bit of sharing from Angelo. And I always like to say that the sparkle in his eye in this photo is not photoshopped, that really is, how he looks, and he's just the kindest, gentlest soul. And when we were asking him to share his story, he said something else that we didn't expect, which is that he and his wife, Sandy, are happy, since they've accessed our services and become a part of the First United community, that they're happy. And, when we think of all of the ways that we try and think about metrics about, affordable housing and responding to the opioid crisis and, the deepening of poverty and income disparity in Canada, to hear just sort of as an aside that somebody's happy is such a, it really makes you stop and think about the why of what we do. And so just wanted to share a little bit about Angelo and his story, but that's all I have to say, I guess, about our redevelopment. And hopefully, I think I only went a little bit over, so.
Well, thank you so much, Carmen Gayasica. I hope I said that right.
Perfect and surprising.
I spent an inordinate amount of time looking up proper Hauduk pronunciation. Anyway, maybe not inordinate, maybe ordinate is actually the word I should be using. So thank you to you, Carmen, and also to you, Abigail, for bringing your wisdom today and your insights, and you've given us a lot to think about. And I am not overwhelmed in the chat with comments and questions. So while you're all thinking about your comments and questions that you want to put forward, you can use the raise hand feature, because I don't see everybody. Actually, yes, Livia is going to put us, but I can't see everybody on one screen right away. So if you raise your hand using that little feature at the bottom, it'll move you to the top of the screen so I can see you, or you can put something into the chat. And Helena Rose had a question about the 7 needs, and I think that was from Carmen, right?
So I just added the needs, but I copied it from the table of contents and it put the page numbers from our community engagement report in there. So.
Yeah, so the first one was housing, and then food services, shelter, overdose crisis, spiritual needs, programming, and advocacy. Right.
Maybe while people are thinking of other questions, I can just share something. So we're members of the Canadian Housing Renewal Association, which is sort of a membership and lobbyist organization for the nonprofit housing sector across Canada, and have attended a couple of their national congresses. And I mentioned that we worked really hard to come up with a project that was financially sustainable, that maximized affordability, but also maintained our ownership. And, since this is a faith-based gathering, I will share with you one of the most disturbing things that I heard at the CHRA in a presentation on the role that faith-based organizations can play in addressing the housing crisis in Canada, was that because the church was in decline and we own so much collective property worth billions of dollars between all of the different denominations, that was basically like open season on low-cost land. And like that, those were actually the words that this nonprofit housing developer used. And, some of the things that were non-negotiables for me in leading this project were non-negotiables, because I saw the ways that when push came to shove and working with for-profit and sometimes even nonprofit developers, like the needs and the value commitments of the church sort of got placed as secondary to the needs and the wants of the developers that they were working with. And so I think that that's a really, I think the United Church more broadly is developing expertise through our property resource team here in Pacific Mountain region, but also through the property, United Church Property Corporation, which is a development management subsidiary of the General Council that's brought in people with for-profit experience to come in and work for the church to protect the church's interests, because one of the reasons we built on the third floor of this building is a beautiful sanctuary space with 20-foot high ceilings, and I said we don't currently have a worshiping congregation, but that doesn't mean that we never will. Like, we want to build an asset that will be here for 60 to 100 years, and we don't know, as people live through the housing crisis and the climate emergency, like what their community and faith needs, how those will change over time, and so just if you're considering redevelopment and something doesn't feel right, like, trust your instincts on that, because there are a lot of people outside of the faith, out of our churches that, see the church's willingness to partner as an opportunity where they don't necessarily center our interests, and that's a very real thing. Like, you're not crazy if you feel like your little heebie-jeebies are going off about somebody. I sat on the board of the Vancouver School of Theology while I was doing my master's in divinity, and we redeveloped the castle space that used to be the Vancouver School of Theology, and we had a 1,000-year lease from UBC, and the redevelopment of our property around the castle was supposed to result in a seismic upgrade of the castle plus $16 million minimum endowment or whatever, and that plus paying off all of our existing long-term debt that we had as the school. At the end of that, they paid off our debt, and we had 1 year of operating surplus, and like the rest of the profits disappeared into the pockets of the developers that we were working with, as opposed to St. Andrew's Hall, which was immediately adjacent to us, had a property about like 1/8 of the size, and they made $50 million off of their property. So I think it's important to trust, not to be scared of partnering on redeveloping your church property, but also like make sure that your interests are protected. Make sure you have good legal counsel. I think like penny wise, pound foolish is not an area. That's not an area where you want to be penny wise, pound foolish. And it's important to have good people around you that will make sure that the church's interests are protected first. And I would have rather seen us have to incorporate a little bit of market rentals to achieve the type of impact that I think our building will have, than to have to cave on selling an airspace parcel or doing something that was otherwise outside of our values.
Question for Carmen in the chat.
I think you mean at the beginning of my presentation, I sort of had the 3 points. Is that what you're asking, Joan?
At the end, the third one was maintain ownership, but I missed the first.
Oh, yeah. So what did we say? We said we wanted to maintain ownership. We wanted to enable but not operate housing, and that we wanted to maximize affordability.
Right. That might be a different, there might be a different mix of those potentially, depending on your situation though, right?
Yeah, those were the things our board said were important, but I know, other churches that have engaged in redevelopment or sale of property in the lower mainland of BC have included like creating an endowment to ensure the sustainability of their congregational ministry. And so for them, like for-profit strata sales were an important part of doing that, or changing their endowment from income generating property to a liquid endowment in order to facilitate required upgrades of a heritage building. So they were able to sell an additional rental property in order to liberate some of the equity that they had in a very very sizable investment in a rental property, but they couldn't afford, the tens of millions of dollars they needed to renovate their church. So they were able to like take most of the money from the sale of their rental building and put it into an investment endowment and use some of the cash to reinvest in their existing church building. So I think it just, like, to Jason's point, it's you develop your own theological framework, but like answer your own why about why you're doing it and what goals you want to achieve and what are the deal breakers for you.
By the way, if anybody has any questions that they didn't think of, you can always email me at the email provided and I will pass it on to Carmen or Abigail as needed.
Okay, well, we are at the halfway point. We've had 2 sessions and we have 2 sessions to go. That was a fantastic presentation tonight, so thank you to both of our presenters. The next session is on August 4th at 6:30, and Graham Cubitt will be the presenter. He will be focusing on the affordable housing process based on his experiences with Inwell, which is a Christian charity that creates affordable housing communities that support people seeking health, wellness, and belonging. So I hope that you'll all be able to join us then. And again, thank you very much for being here tonight and hope to see all of you in 2 weeks' time. Good night.